In this video, we're going to explore transferring hostility from one person to another, or directing who gets to hold the bag. Now, the bag in any cult is the taboo item. And so the game in a cult is to engineer an environment that produces a phenomena that the cult then labels taboo. For example, if you abuse your children, they will protest. If you now label protesting, being sassy, talking back, questioning your parents, and now that's taboo, now the cult has engineered a framework. For example, uneducated and abusive parents don't come out of nowhere. You have to engineer an entire system that sustains psychological illiteracy, emotional illiteracy, marital illiteracy, trauma illiteracy. Then you have to add shame. Then you have to add abusive dynamics and power. You need all of these types of things in order to sustainably engineer a large percentage of parents to be abusive. Having created a large group of abusive parents, they will, of course, do what they're supposed to. Abusive parents are supposed to abuse their children. It would be inconsistent mathematically with the equation to say, here's a bunch of abusive parents that are behaving exemplarily in all areas towards their children. And so if you engineer the conditions that lead to ignorance, confusion, and shame, you get abusive parents. Having got a good stack of abusive parents, you then get abused children. Abused children don't enjoy being abused any more than anyone else, and so there's going to be resistance. And the question is, see, this resistance is the healthiest part in the entire system. The cult's engineering ignorance and shame. The ignorant and shame-based parents are abusing their children. That's the flaw. The child protesting the abuse is the one healthy part of the system. But all systems, all cults, are committed to self-perpetuity. They're not committed to intelligence. They're not committed to science. They're not committed to what's in the best interest of the child. They're interested in the continuity of the system. This is the only thing that explains the vast amount of hypocrisy that exists in systems such as the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is a system of dogmas, for example, commandments. Thou shalt not kill. And we're going to import our dogma over onto your island or your cult over here. And if you don't like it, we'll kill you for not adhering to our dogma not to kill. You have complete schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenic cults, of course, produce schizophrenic individuals, because the individual has to split in half in order to relate to the schizophrenia in the cult. If you're an integrated human being and your church comes up to you and says, bow down to Jesus or I will kill you, you say, who's Jesus? Well, he's the guy that said, thou shalt not kill. Well, you've immediately identified that you're insane. So, are you a trustworthy person to point out sanity to? Obviously not, because you've got a knife. So you're insane and you've got a knife. Okay, let's just pretend that you're not insane and go along with the plan so that you don't chop my head off, and thus the great burgeoning of Catholicism across various territories. who naturally didn't initially take kindly to their way of doing things, being shamed and discounted and told, oh, that's the wrong way of doing things. We have the right way of doing things. Well, they certainly had the guns. And so the framework is that as the healthy child protests the incompetence of sociopathic parents induced into a sociopathic cult within a framework of psychological illiteracy, there has to be something to keep the system in place. So we make a taboo. Thou shalt obey thy parents. Thou shalt love thy parents. You know, let's just institutionalize that religiously and culturally. Culturally, you listen to your parents. You know, we're not going to interfere with that. Religiously, thou shalt love thy parents. Now, here again, we're revealing insanity, because you cannot command feelings. You can command actions out of fear, if not out of preference. If someone doesn't want to die and you put a gun to their head, you can command them to do various things that obviously they didn't want to do, or you wouldn't have to put a gun to their head. But you cannot command someone to love. You're not loving me. Love me. Well, I don't love you anymore for ordering me about. That's ordering me about doesn't produce the feeling. It's very similar to a test tube. If you go to a chemist and you say, turn this thing into ice, turn this water into ice, the chemist will say, have a go. And you tell the water, turn into ice. It doesn't turn into ice. Why? Because the alchemical environment has not been introduced that produces ice. There's an alchemical environment that produces the feeling of love. And it doesn't tend to correlate to being dominated and bossed about. And it doesn't tend to correlate to ignorance. Meaning when someone says, you shall love, that is a profound state of ignorance. Because there's a confusion. The heart is like a thermometer. If it's 85 degrees out, the thermometer will tell the truth. If it's 85 degrees out and the thermometer is working, it will say 85 degrees. But if you tell the thermometer, I want 100, or I'm going to break you. Come on, let's have 100 degrees. The thermometer, if they had articulating ability, would say, I'm not moving the mercury up or down. That's happening because of the environment. I'm just giving an accurate report of what's going on. Well, I don't like your report. Well, that may work with human beings who are willing to lie. You know, a CEO of a company takes a profit and loss statement into their accountant, and they say, I don't like this number. My stock is going to tank if I tell this number. Figure out some way to get another number. Well, the accountant says, you figure out a way to sell your products for a higher profit, and I will report a higher number. Well, when the CEO is paying the accounting firm $50 million to be the accountant, they say, well, I'm sure we could shop the numbers around and find an accountant who will report the numbers. And this is how fraud and corruption occurs every day in a capitalist cult, is people are willing to relabel. There's a little bottle with a label called poison because there's arsenic in it. And if people bully them enough, they'll take off the label that accurately reads arsenic and they'll put on a label that says love and delight. And lo and behold, you've got your solution. Now I've got a bottle of love and delight rather than arsenic. And this is the kind of bludgeoning in one of the primary abuses that goes on in psychologically illiterate cults, because once you have mislabeled arsenic as love and delight, and you accurately believe that love and delight are good things, you drink more arsenic. And that is to be expected in psychologically illiterate abuse cults. So we've got to then punish the child that is protesting the ignorance, the stupidity, and the cruelty that comes out of it by making bad children talk back to their parents. Bad children are sassy. Bad children go to their rooms, because we've got to shut you up from accurately reporting how fucked up our protocol of relating to you feels is. We've got to train you into becoming subservient members of our cult who will send their children off to learn algebra and calculus and the history of bridges and the history of whether Abraham Lincoln shot this cannon off of this bulkhead in 1874 or was it 1876? Oh, you got that wrong. You're not fit to be an adult. We're not going to teach you how to cook. We're not going to teach you how to drive. We're not going to teach you how to have sex. We're not going to teach you how to resolve a conflict with your wife. We're not going to teach you anything useful. And then you too can be, call that an education. And then things will stay the way that they are. Well, one of the issues with holding the bag is when you have a dysfunctional system, there will be some percentage of chronic and unnecessary suffering that is induced and created by the dysfunction in the system. That's the definition of a dysfunctional system. If a restaurant has a system of first we buy the food here, then we wash it like this, then we do this, and 1 in 100 restaurant clients gets violently sick with stomach pain because the system leads 1% of the food poorly sanitized or vulnerable to bacteria. And you could say this is a 99% good system. But obviously, if you go to a restaurant and you've got a 1% chance of getting violently sick and ending up with stomach pneumonia in the hospital, that's not good enough. You want like 1 in 10,000 restaurant customers getting sick before you want to take the risk to eat at that restaurant. You want it to be safer than it would be at home. So a faulty system creates a certain amount of pain, suffering, and failure. The question is, what do you do with that? How do you deal with a faulty system? Well, medicine, you diagnose the fault in the system. You correlate the fault with the unnecessary suffering. You develop a hypothesis for how you would adjust the system to reduce that suffering. You give it a shot, and you measure, and you see, did it go down? Okay, we're making progress. Now only 1 in 1,000 of our restaurant clients are going home with stomach sickness. So 10 times improvement. Still quite not enough. Let's do more of that, and let's get it down to 1 in 10,000. Because, frankly, if you go out to eat 3 times a week, and you happen to go to that restaurant, for 10,000 times, that's going to be a number of years. And if the food's really good and if it's not a permanent stomach sickness, maybe you'll forgive them 1/10,000. So they've got it down. They've polished the system, their training system, their washing vegetable system, the place they buy the groceries from. They didn't just buy them cheap off of a street from a dumpster diver. They, went and, picked it from a reputable source. And so you're willing to accept that as a system. Now, no system is perfect, but all flaws, all pain emerge out of this faulty system. Now, the system's goal is to perpetuate itself. And the leader of the system is usually the most interested in maintaining the status quo of the system, because if the system is found out to be fundamentally flawed, then we like to blame our leaders. It's called who carries the bag. Well, the leader doesn't want to carry the bag and say, yeah, I don't know how to improve this system, and you're absolutely right. 1 in 100 people are sick and are going to keep getting sick, and I don't really know how to fix that. But I'd still like to have my salary. I'd like to have people bowing to me on the street. I'd like to get bribes for, approving this or that permit. I'd like to be at the top of this power system because that's good for me. Now, the best thing I can do to maintain that status quo is to say the system is wonderful, but there are a few rotten people who aren't applying it. Those 1 in 100 customers getting food, sick in the restaurant, they're not taking very good care of their bodies. They're not real, I hate to say it, but they're not the kind of people we'd like to associate with. These other 99 people, good, upstanding citizens, he must have ate wrong. Because there's nothing wrong with me, because I want to keep my position. And of course, parents blame their children. And, my parents would blame me for being born. So they picked out of billions of people, they picked each other. Okay? I could pick any of these other billions of people, but I'm going to pick you. And having picked you and explored what you're all about, I'm going to get married to you. And having get married with you, I'm now not going to wear a condom, and surprise, surprise, a child is going to be born because I'm not going to use any birth control. So it's amazing, no condom, no birth control. Magically, a child appears. How did this happen? This child, is ruining my life. And, it feels good. All systems, however dysfunctional or effective, stay in place because at the level of consciousness that the people in that system are operating with, the system seems to make some sense. So let's just blame the child for being born rather than take responsibility for not wearing a condom. And surprise, surprise, another child is ruining our life, right? Another one. How do these things happen? And then once we get a little bit older, of course, then let's blame the children for picking their parents, right? Your mother did this. Your father did this, right? Let's blame the child for our decisions. Why? Because we appear, to the insane, we appear to look better. An ignorant person will blame someone else for their decision. And another ignorant person, it takes two, might go along with that idea. If the other person is smart, they say, you can't blame a child because you didn't wear a condom. But if you've got two idiots, now the other person looks good to another idiot. And so if a cult raises a good number of idiots, then idiotic behavior actually feels good because it makes you look smart to other idiots. And so there you are. So the question is, these taboo things, taboo feelings, it's absurd. If you give a thermometer a taboo temperature, whatever you do, don't read in at 75 to 80. The farmer is not going to like that. Or whatever you do, don't read in at 28 degrees. The orange farmer hates frost on his orange trees. Just please, please. The temperature may drop, but don't read 28 degrees. The farmer may break you. He doesn't want to hear that number. His whole orange crop is out. But an intelligent farmer wants to know the temperature because they want accurate data. And they're curious. If you're competent, you're curious about what's not working and what you can do to make it better. So one of the things that we've done in our cult is we've made being a bitch taboo. Being emotional, taboo. Being pouting, taboo. Complaining, taboo. Being violent and angry and losing your temper, taboo. So you lose social rank in a cult that creates these taboos. Now, interestingly, the cult doesn't lose rank because the obvious question is, if you've got all of these people losing their temper, people don't just lose their temper for no reason. There has to be systemic underlying causes that lead to large amounts of people from your cult losing their temper, where this other cult, they're smiling and happy. So what's wrong with the cult? Because people aren't choosing their cult. These little kids aren't choosing, I'd like to speak English, I'd like to focus on capitalism, I'd like to go to an education institution that does not have a single hour of emotional literacy. I'd like to be bullied in school, thank you very much. I'd like this and this and the other. I'd like to have parents that go off and come home exhausted at the end of the day and have affairs and then lie about it and hit each other. I think I would really appreciate being born in such a cult. Could you arrange that? Okay, here you are, sign up to be an American, good job. No, kids aren't doing this. So if this is going on, well, why not question the cult that is producing so many angry people? But cults always pass the buck. They pass the bag. No. Being an American is the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to you. Just look at it. We eat more than other people. Number one. We work more hours than many other people. We have bigger televisions. You have made the right choice. Do those things actually correlate to well-being? Have there been studies that show that the happiest people on the planet have the biggest television? Oh, in fact, the more screen time, the less happy the person is, statistically speaking. So you're bragging about something that makes your people unhappy. Well, maybe one of the reasons your people are unhappy is because education, in this case even science, is used to misdirect from the most important thing, which is statistical protocols correlated to well-being. If you have a protocol of thinking, feeling, or speaking that elevates or depresses well-being, that's relevant. Who gives a shit that your TVs are a foot bigger than everyone else? What is important is for the environmental and energetic cost and the financial cost, did your family's happiness improve or go down? But we're just not going to study that. We're going to remain willfully ignorant. Well, that's going to create a lot of unhappy people because a lot of unhappy people are going to make mistakes, thinking that that big TV is going to make them happy. And when it doesn't, when it does the opposite, then they're not going to know what happened. All the advertisers that my government sold my attention to, whoever pays the most money for my attention gets the ad spot. Whoever gets the ad spot gets my attention. Whoever gets my attention gets the power of my brain to contort the truth using the science of manipulative advertising. So I'm not getting an education, and my body is being wired by the highest bidder in a sociopathic paradigm in which making more money at other people's expense is more important to a large number of people than measuring and increasing the state of sustainable well-being. In other words, I am in an insane pathological cult that is masking that cruelty and insanity by renaming a constructive direction rather than actually studying the science. We have things like modern and contemporary. Well, who gives a shit? Well, modern is good. Says who? Where's the data that shows that going from ceramic or plastic fridge to stainless steel fridges, you know, the facing, this is the big thing, you know, stainless steel. It's harder to clean, easier to scratch, more expensive, but it's contemporary. There's more germs in metal things than there is in wood. Doesn't matter, it's contemporary. Contemporary is good. The industrial look, it's ugly, square, but it's progress. Why? Because we said so, that's all. We all said so. We all agree. We don't need science. We don't need data. Change is good because we said so. And there's no doubt there's a lot of change, and there's no doubt that change is catastrophically transforming our environment. Every single time people have to tear out all their appliances, tear out their kitchens and put it in to be more contemporary, a whole kitchen has to go to the landfill, and a whole bunch of natural resources have to be consumed to have the new look. And that's good enough for most people in an uneducated cult. Ooh, this is very contemporary. It's the easiest thing in the world. By definition, anything you do to change anything is newer than what was there before. You now have a new cell phone. It has worse coverage, or we're not going to even bother ourselves with measuring such tiny details. The important thing is it's new and it's more expensive. So, in this type of framework, with escalating pain and tragedy, the question is, who's going to get stuck holding the taboo bag? And this is one area where parents can play games with one another that confuse the child. So I was talking with my wife Jen earlier tonight about her childhood abuse. And her mother was the one who physically and psychologically beat and tormented her, let's say 90% or 95% of the time. And the case she was trying to make out was that her dad was a good parent and her mother was the bad parent. In other words, so her mother's ending up holding the bag because we'd all agree tying a 8-year-old girl up in a burlap sack and whacking her with sticks and kicking her and insulting her and gambling away the family's money and leaving a 7-year-old in charge of a 2-year-old and then punishing the 7-year-old because mom's off gambling, right? So she can't look after her own child. She couldn't, put a condom on. And besides, it would be un-Catholic, to actually take responsibility for anything as important as whether or not you're ready to have a child. So you have abuse at the church level. You have abuse, at the government level. My wife's Filipina, so the government is hand and glove in with the church. So you have a church that's more interested in growing its membership, which you get if you have families having 8 children, whether they can afford them or not. You get traffic congestion, you get a lot of addiction, you get a lot of poverty, and you get a lot of abuse towards children. So good on you, Catholic Church, for making sure the Muslims don't get ahead in their population. Let's just decimate our own parishioners under the excuse of, we couldn't possibly evolve to include family planning, despite the obvious misery in front of every priest's eyes on a daily basis. No. So you have corrupt authority at the church level, then you have a corrupt authority. The government isn't standing up for the citizens. They're stealing the people's money under penalty of imprisonment or death for not paying taxes. But they're, with all their leadership authority, aren't sticking up for the citizens and saying, your church is actually selling you out for a global competition with the Muslims and calling it being traditional and Christ-like. It's complete hypocrisy. It's a complete joke at your expense. Cut it out, wear a condom, use some birth control, right? So, sold out by the government, sold out by the culture. Of course, doesn't include any parental literacy, addiction, child abuse, incest, been going on forever. Let's just leave that out of the education system. We could teach children how to defend themselves against a statistical probability of childhood abuse, but that would upset the parents. The parents could protect other children, but why confront an abusive, angry parent when you can just let their 6-year-old child take the abuse head on? Because you're only 6 foot tall and might get hurt if you challenged another parent on their childhood abuse. But the 6-year-old, I'm sure they can take it, right? Complete abnegation of any concept of maturity, adulthood, ethics, evolution, science? No. Let's look out for number 1. Let's leave our most vulnerable future generation. Let's fuck them up as much as possible so that by the time they're an adult, they'll be so fucked up, they'll do the same to their children. How's that for revenge? Cult fucked me up. You're not going to get away scot-free. Let's just perpetuate it another 10 generations. So she thinks her dad's a good guy. So children always default to thinking their parents are amazing. It takes a lot of abuse to get a child to see how fucked up their parents are. Because the child is in a big bind psychologically. If the child says, you know what, I think I'm being raised by morons, and they're already 30, 40 years old, and they don't show any signs of gaining intelligence, these are morons. And I'm stuck with them. Legally, financially, I can do nothing. I'm 6 years old. And these assholes, these ignorant fools, are going to be setting me up for physical, financial, psychological, and sexual abuse for the next 10 years. That's how fucked up they are. and nothing I can do about it. No, no, no. This is a disaster for the child. I don't want to learn that the person I depend on for my life is going to be sadistically ruining that life and has superior mass. They're going to get away with it. And I'm going to have devastating trauma by the time I can leave the house. That's my statistical probability. Hooray, let's get up in the morning, go to school, let's learn this, so that we can prepare for a lifetime of psychological misery. And then be blamed, of course, by our parents for the fallout of that, and then asked for money. You know, it's like her parents couldn't give a damn about her well-being, but as soon as she gets married and has access to money, oh my goodness, could we have this for this? So-and-so's gotten a gambling debt over here. Could we do this, 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 and the other? We're not interested in your feelings. We never have been. But we're interested in how we can use you, because that's how reptiles think. It's all about survival. It's not about caring for other people. So this is a system. It's a flawed system. But the question is, who's going to take the hit in the system? Now, in this case, you see it's Jen's mother. You know, the gambler, the shrieker, the beater, the incompetent. So let's take a look at this idea. So her mother's holding the bag, right? Nothing wrong with the Catholic Church, nothing wrong with the government of the Philippines, nothing wrong with the Americans and all their corrupt influences, or the Spanish, you know, butchering a country half to death, and you know, unless you become Catholic. Oh no, nothing. That doesn't scar a culture in any way. The problem is, of course, preferably the child, because they're the most indefensible. If you can scapegoat the child and then hit them for talking back, well, that's brilliant. Because now the government and the church can fault the citizens, and the citizens can fault their children, and the children can't talk back. And once they build up enough hate, stupidity, and cruelty from being treated that way, they can then go on to have children of their own and abuse them in the same way and blame their children. It's wonderful. So, but if we say, no, this isn't Jen's fault. Anyone in that situation behaves this. You've got fucked up parents. You know, you can afford to examine this when you're free of it. You cannot afford to examine the cruelty and sadistic incompetence of your cult while you still depend on that cult to survive, to feel secure, to have some semblance of dignity, love, and belonging. You got to break free of it before it's safe to recognize the incompetence. So she's free of it, but you know, her mother was the one that dished out the abuse. So her father didn't hit her. Her father didn't scream at her. So he's innocent, right? He didn't do anything wrong. He's this wonderful, loving parent. This horrible wife torments everyone in the family. She's holding the bag. Now, if we look a little deeper, though, what's her dad's role in the situation? So culturally, and what's the cult's role in the situation? Well, of course, like any other country today, not a single hour of emotional literacy in the entirety of the education curriculum. In fact, her parents didn't even learn to read and write. So illiteracy and no possibility of becoming literate. At least you could educate yourself on things like shame, intergenerational abuse cycles, etc., if you know how to read and write. but you've got the incompetence of the Spanish regime, the American regime, and the new governmental regime. We had Marcos and all of his corruption in collusion with the Catholic Church, which is much more interested in people studying the Bible and feeling shame-based and giving them their money and having more children than they are in ensuring that every citizen in their country knows how to even read and write, let alone have a psychological education. So you have the fault there, obviously. Highly abused parents with no education and poverty institutionalized by their religion are going to be highly abusive. But we also have a cult that shames women. This is part of chauvinism, and it's very common around the world, that shames women when their men have sex with other women. The man has sex with another woman. The cult divides the shame differently. The cult basically says, well, sex is fun. Men like to have fun. Men are the important ones. They're enjoying themselves. Good for them. Of course, they're being men, right? That's the assessment of the cult when men betray the marital agreement of fidelity to be monogamous. Now, what it tells women is you're nothing. You didn't love your man good enough. You didn't hold his attention. Now, this is, of course, changing, but there is unquestionably more shame dumped on the woman cheated on than the person who cheats. And that's more so in less developed cults. So every time her dad cheats on another woman, he feels good because he's processing his hostility, his rage, his frustration. I mean, that's innate in the system. If you are poor and have 8 children, it's going to be frustrating. You're going to feel inadequate because you are. That's institutionalized. The Catholic Church institutionalizes inadequacy by forbidding contraception in poor countries. So you're told by the Bible to take care of your family, and you're told by the Catholic Church to have lots of kids, and you're in a poor country. Who's responsible? Well, you are for believing the stupidity of your cult, but most individuals find it too unsettling to question their cult. The leadership at the top of the Catholic Church certainly is. They have little debates at the Vaticans, the same kind of debates that led them to cover up the fact that 5% of their priests are pedophilic, and to rotate them around parishes until enough heat came up and then send them off to somewhere else where they could abuse more children rather than risk the reputation of the church. So at those high levels, you have the same schizophrenia. The low levels, you have some, person being a minister because they care about people. At the high levels, you're one of the richest corporations on the planet, investing in environmentally destructive companies so you can make more money, bedecking your top brass with materialistic, gaudy, $100,000 rings and all of this stuff, while teaching that the meek and the poor will inherit the earth. And you're covering up the public relations facts that might stem your purse strings. You're a corrupt motherfucking asshole parading and masquerading as a religious figure. Schizophrenia, again. So her dad is going to be frustrated and feel inadequate. Well, one of the things the cult tells men is if you have lots of sex and people want to have sex with you, that you feel better about yourself. You are an adequate human being, because when someone chooses to have sex with you, there's a conference of value. I choose to be vulnerable and risk all of these things in order to be close to you. So highly frustrated, inadequate men in a cult like ours will want to have sex to bolster their self-image. Because when they go home, all they see is their inadequacy. There's another scrawny kid, I can't pay the medical bills on that. There's another sulking child there that's unhappy, I can't do anything about that. There's a wife who wants money, and I don't have enough of it. Fuck this. How do I get out of this horrible feeling? Well, I can drink, I can have sex. So, of course, this is institutionalized. But every time he drinks, and every time he has an affair, now his inadequacy, and of course this is the hostility, and it all, the child is the ultimate butt of the joke, but he comes home in a system that was guaranteed to make him feel like a failure. And because the system says that he's the provider, the wife complains, I married you because you said you'd provide. These are your children, provide. He feels completely inadequate again. Now, if he loses his temper, if he beats his wife, if he goes into a depression, she will kick at him, lash out at him verbally, you useless son of a bitch, and he will be left carrying the bag. He will have hurt feelings, he'll feel angry, he'll feel like, he's got a bad reputation as the angry person. But he's furious, of course, because he doesn't want to be working 8-hour days at the fish yard and come slogging home to be told you smell bad, there's not enough money, you're the useless thing, and find out his wife has been gambling the rent money. But that's what he gets. How's he going to medicate those feelings of inadequacy? Well, if you drink, you obliterate it. Thank heavens, a rest from all my self-hatred and all the hatred directed towards me and all the hypocrisy of my church. Oh my goodness, let me drink. Or he can drink and have sex, or he can give little gifts to the concubine, the lover, who doesn't have any children by him, so those little gifts are nice extras. They're not an inadequate, never good enough amount for the kids. So he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to be the angry one. He doesn't want to lose his temper. He doesn't want to beat his kids. But he's furious. He feels inadequate. So he puts more money to alcohol, mistresses, and has sex with other women, which destroys the reputation of his wife as an adequate wife. Meanwhile, she's stuck there with 8 children, never able to trust her husband, feeling desperately insecure and afraid that he's going to run off with some other woman and leave her with these 8 children. She's terrified. She's in shame. She's enraged. And she's got 8 children wanting her love and attention, needing her love and attention. And she beats the shit out of them. he gives her his hate and frustration. He gives her his shame. And then once she is enraged, he walks out the door and leaves her to beat the shit out of innocent infants that he jointly brought into the world, admittedly with the coercion of a fucked up church. He brought them into the world. And he walked away because he rathered his 2-year-old, his 4-year-old, his 7-year-old, his 8-year-old to be raged at, attacked, and beaten than him. Now, he's the strongest member physically of the family. And when you take someone who has been abused in their own childhood and who has 8 children, and you shame them publicly by having a public affair, they are, as an emotionally illiterate human being, wanting to beat someone up. They want revenge. They want to give the shame back. Now, if he was an adult, male or female, if he was an adult, he would take on the consequences of his actions and fight with her head on. And in doing so, would diffuse that energy and protect his children. But that's not what he did. He walked away. He said, I'm going to go have another drink. This is too noisy in here. Bye, kids. And he left them to be severely, psychologically and physically abused in a predictable pattern. It's like leaving a bunch of children and your wife in a fire, in a burning house, so that you can get out. And then other people look at my wife and wonder why she feels as if she has no value. I look at her, what do you mean you have no value? What kind of nonsense is this? You're valuable here, you're valuable there, you're valuable over here. In fact, you are the most valuable person to me on the entire planet. I could divorce you at any time, and I would if I believed you had no value and that there were lots of other people to marry that were much more compatible and had much more value. I'm not trying to ruin my own life. I have freedom, and I've picked you as the one person to marry after traveling the globe. Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I looked at you and said, this woman has absolutely no value? I think I'll marry her. Or do you think that with all of my perceptive abilities and time with dozens of lovers, do you think that I'm an idiot? And that you really have no value, but I haven't figured that out. You think that I don't see you. It's not in the rational brain. This feeling, I have no value, I'm worthless, is the deep archetypal template of psychological understanding that a child that is abandoned and set up to be beaten by the father, that is humiliated and shamed by the church, where the cult and the neighbors, they hear the screaming, but they don't intervene. Every one of the grown giants in her life gave her the message, you have no value. Any of the neighbors could have confronted her mother and protected the child. That would have told that child she had an ounce of value. No one ever did. The father could have stayed home and taken the brunt of the rage created by his cheating, so the child didn't have to deal with it. But the father said, you're not worth it, kid. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. I'll leave you. Let's see if you're still alive when I come back. Your mother looks like an absolute maniac. I'm getting out of here. I'll leave you with the maniac I, the giant, can't deal with. You know how terrifying that is for a child? Do you know what it does to grasp that there is not a single grown-up big person in your universe that gives a shit about you, that would not sell you out in a heartbeat to avoid a little discomfort? And when you try and talk back to be hit harder, you see a giant can destroy the spirit of a little child. And so I'm trying to rationalize with the daughter of two sociopathic abuse survivors that don't know a shit about parenting. And my wife is incredible. I stand by my assessment. She is the most compatible and amazing person I have ever met. Period. And this is hard and frustrating because I'm a psychologically illiterate male that has not been taught to discern between the programs that are in the rational brain and the programs that are in the deep unconscious psyche that come from infantile traumatic abuse. Now, I know more than most because I've spent over 1,000 hours reading trauma books. They don't tell you how to deal with this crisis in one's partner. And so some part of her is stuck with an overwhelming weight of tons of family system shame on her body, pushing her down into this belief that she's worth nothing. And that 7-year-old can't lift tons of weight off of it to return to the healthy truth of every psyche that says, not only am I valuable, every child in a healthy framework understands that they're the center of the universe, that they're the most important thing that's ever been created. It takes a lot of weight to knock that down. But what I found interesting, and the kind of core theme of this video, is the way that the bag has moved now that my wife has escaped the abuse. Mentally, psychologically, they're the bad ones. They're the crappy parents that raised them. But she's like, oh, my dad isn't bad. He just had sex with, he never hit me. He just induced the rage in my mother by shaming her repeatedly and then left us alone to be beaten and did not comfort and reassure me of my value when he returned, sometimes days later, and saw the bruises left by his cowardice, a cowardice he wouldn't own. he gave that valuelessness, that shame to his daughter. And I think it's interesting the way that the abuse, the scapegoat, the abuser, the one who's doing the actual raging, is often the one left holding the bag for all the others who walked away, hoping they could escape any ownership because they're not really adults. They're illiterate children in grown bodies, unconsciously doing what's been going on for centuries, endorsed by a fucked up cult.